Now, I did say, didn't I, having spent 2 hours of the slot this morning talking about Trump, that we would not be talking about him for the rest of the show. And yet here we are. Much like Trump himself, it is just a promise, I'm afraid, everybody, I cannot keep. Because we're going to be crossing now to Washington, Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent, of course. And we can do no other, can we, Simon? Because the president is remaking not only the political order at home, the economic order around the world, and yet again more extraordinary antics with Elon Musk and what he and Trump are doing to US aid.
Yeah, absolutely, Lewis. I'm sorry to have forced you to break your promise.
As if.
But I think we're witnessing absolutely unprecedented events here in Washington, D.C. And it is important to draw attention to the nature of them. I got a text last night from a former senior administration official who described what had taken place over the weekend, a frenzy of activity, largely led by the entirely unelected Elon Musk, describing that frenzy of activity as a total revolutionary takeover. And as you were just saying a few minutes ago, we now know that essentially it is all over for USAID, the United States Agency of International Development, which is far and away the biggest player globally in the international humanitarian assistance and developmental game. So that is going to have knock-on effects not only for the thousands of employees who have basically been told to stay away from the Ronald Reagan building here in the heart of Washington today, after it was raided by Elon Musk's Doge Brigade. That's the Department of Government Efficiency, which of course is not really an actual government department, but it's also going to have monumental knock-on impacts for USAID programs all over the world, whether it's, neonatal classes in Haiti or food assistance in parts of Africa or refugee assistance in Venezuela. Scores and scores of programs that are now immediately, I think, going to come to a total standstill. What Musk did through his proxies, and his proxies, by the way, are all pals of his and business associates of his, again, entirely unelected, but seemingly authorized by President Donald Trump, was to show up at two separate government departments over the weekend, USAID, the Agency for International Development, and even more critically, the United States Treasury. At least in the case of USAID, they forced their way into the building. When security attempted to stop them from gaining access to the building, they threatened to call the US Marshals to allow them to enter. In both departments, the Treasury and USAID, there were standoffs with employees, senior figures who were saying you cannot access these computer systems. In the case of the Treasury, the system that Musk and his team wanted to access was the payments system that handles billions and billions of dollars of US government payments. At USAID, they were some officials trying to protect systems that contained classified information. In both cases, those officials not only lost the argument, but they were all sent home on administrative leave. They were all immediately turfed out, essentially, of their positions. And Musk today controls the entire payments mechanism of the United States Treasury. Now, through that mechanism, has access to millions of Social Security numbers, has access to records of Americans who have received tax refunds, who have received assistance grants, and at USAID got his mitts on the computer system, shut down the website, terminated the email accounts of scores of employees, and has access to the classified information that those career employees were trying to defend. Musk and his team have been made officially Treasury employees as they start sifting through payment data, and literally on his own social media platform last night, publishing lists of recipients of Treasury grants that he says he is immediately cancelling, including a whole raft of them that were focused on assistance, including humanitarian assistance. And he's not stopping there. He took to X last night to declare the National Endowment for Democracy a scam. As with USAID, he has inferred that it is a criminal enterprise without any indication of any evidence to support that view. And I suspect at the National Endowment for Democracy's headquarters here in Washington, D.C., they are awaiting the Doge knock on the door. We have not seen anything like this in the modern era, and most extraordinary of all, from the Democrats, absolute crickets. Barely a statement being issued. Very late in the day, Democrats on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee put out a statement asking questions about what had taken place at the Treasury over the weekend. There is no leadership on the Democratic side. There is nothing being done here to enforce the traditional guardrails that in the first term stopped Donald Trump from doing anything that he wants, but now appear to be melting away in face of this onslaught by Elon Musk.
I mean, it is extraordinary, and you run out of superlatives, don't you, Simon? But there is there not a sense, even from behind the scenes, from Republicans on Capitol Hill, concern that Musk is amassing an astounding amount of power?
Well, I think there's definitely concern, but it was notable that not a single Republican signed on to the Democrat statement that was issued by their side on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee demanding answers to what had taken place over the weekend at the Treasury. They are frit. They don't want to put their head above the parapet and do anything to offend the boss. In this case, I think that's still President Donald Trump, although Elon Musk throughout this weekend has made us wonder. They all seem to be in lockstep still about putting even his most contentious nominees on into cabinet positions. I mean, I think the only one that might be in any difficulty is Tulsi Gabbard, his nominee to become Director of National Intelligence. But Kash Patel looks like he's going to waltz into office as the next director of the FBI. A Department of Justice employee got in touch with me over the weekend to ask me why the FBI had not yet arrested Elon Musk, given that it was plain to this Department of Justice employee that Elon Musk is breaking the law, that there are no laws that allow him to do many of the things that he did over the weekend. Well, the answer to that, of course, is that purges have already begun at the FBI, and that's before Kash Patel gets there. So the point that I'm making is that things are moving here very quickly because Musk worked the weekend to engage on what I think in other parts of the world would be described as state capture. You know, private business people, oligarchs taking the levers of power here in Washington, D.C. to benefit and aggrandize their own positions. Because of all of that speed that is being engaged by the Trump team, the system seems unable to keep pace. And I was looking back yesterday at the history of this phrase, state capture. And it was first used by the World Bank in the year 2000 to describe events that were taking place in the post-Soviet states, where powerful oligarchs were slowly co-opting their nation's resources and taking the steering wheel of government in those post-Soviet spaces. And the first report that the World Bank issued defining state capture was actually titled, "Seize the State, Seize the Day." And Elon Musk seized the weekend here. You know, Lewis, Washington's a Monday to Friday town. It's really actually now these days only a Tuesday to Thursday kind of town. Saturday and Sunday, those government offices are deserted. And he deliberately, and he said this on social media, he crowed about it. He deliberately picked this weekend to make his move, and it has left the city reeling.
Is there, do you think, Simon, do you think, I mean, we've got the astonishing prospect right now, haven't we? Let's just leave aside the American political element to it and the state capture that you've identified, which is mind-boggling. And my word, are they flooding the zone, to use that Steve Bannon term. But right now, the net result of all of this is that the world's richest man has gone into the offices of USAID over the course of the weekend. He's basically shut it down, which means that some of the world's poorest people will no longer receive some of the humanitarian assistance that they, perhaps life-saving assistance that they had been receiving before.
Yes, absolutely. And this is all part of the plan. I mean, it was on Inauguration Day that Donald Trump published an executive order about international assistance on the part of the United States. I'm just trying to find the text of it here. He declared that America's, and this is a quote, foreign aid industry and bureaucracy are not aligned with American interests and are in many cases antithetical to American values. Now, traditionally, foreign assistance and the fact that the United States, with I think $46 billion that USAID gets to spend, represents more than 40% of the entire world's humanitarian assistance budget, has actually been entirely emblematic of American values. But American values are being redefined by this president. Now, officially, we should say the official White House line is that USAID has simply been folded into the State Department, and that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is now leading a review of its programs to make sure that they align with Donald Trump's policy viewpoints. But Donald Trump has already told us in that executive order he thinks that foreign aid is basically antithetical to American values. So I don't think there's anybody sitting on the edge of their seats, biting their nails, wondering what Marco Rubio is going to conclude when that evaluation period is over. And look, if that evaluation period lasts 90 days, which is notionally what is supposed to take place, those humanitarian assistance programs in far-off parts of the world will have come to a complete standstill by then, because they can't operate without cash, they can't operate without supplies, and they can't operate without guidance and direction from USAID in Washington, D.C. So they have deliberately gutted this, and the chance of it emerging in any kind of fashion that looks like what it looked like before is, I think, negligible. There's also going to be a huge challenge here to foreign governments, including our own. I mean, on the morning in which the Prime Minister may well be celebrating the fact that Donald Trump last night indicated that perhaps he's going to be more lenient with the UK when it comes to tariffs than with the European Union, certainly seems to want to drive a wedge between the UK and the European Union in terms of leniency that he seems willing to offer the UK. I mean, the British government is going to find itself in the unenviable position of, on the one hand, needing Trump's largesse when it comes to reduced or perhaps even zero tariffs on trade, but on the other hand, having to sit there and answer questions about what the British government thinks about all the other frenzy of crazy that is taking place here. That's before we get to mass deportations. They withdrew the settlement visas for 600,000 Venezuelans over the weekend, 300,000 of them living in Florida. And those 600,000 people are now susceptible to deportation. They will definitely be targeted by the Immigration, Customs and Enforcement Division of the US government and trucked back to Venezuela, even though they had been told by the United States government, by the Biden administration, that their temporary settlement documents were all in order and for at least the moment they could stay. That's over 500,000 people from Venezuela alone that are now about to be rounded up. What's Britain going to say about that?
Simon Marks there, LBC's Washington correspondent, with a dizzying assessment. That's not not because of Simon, but because of the extraordinary pace of events that is taking place in Washington. There is a transformation. It goes back to what I was saying before. There is a transformation of the American state, a transformation of the world economic order, and potentially the world political order unfolding second by second right now. It is hard to keep up. We'll do our best here on LBC, certainly on this show, throughout the course of the week. Lewis Goodall here on LBC. The time is 12:53.